initial impressions?
Just one wow. And I feel so lucky that now on this podcast that we're getting to share such amazing, beautiful poetry.
And this happens a lot. Our culture actually smushes stories down because we're like, well, there's no scientific evidence behind that. So, Rachel, would you like to explain your experience?
Do I want to embarrass myself on the internet? Sure, let's go.
What else would you be on the internet for?
What else is the internet for?
I mean,
But to embarrass yourself.
if you're going to tease me, I'm going to tease you.
I know, this is going to live there forever. I'm going to look like a crazy person, but okay.
Welcome to the Poetry Vessel. On this podcast, we invite guests across multiple disciplines to discuss the intersection of poetry with philosophy, psychology, the occult, neuroscience, popular culture, and more. I'm your host, Nathan Hassel, Malibu Poet Laureate Emeritus, published poet, and professional book editor. And this is my wife, Rachel. She's an expert in IO psychology, plus she's the other half of the Poetry Vessel enterprise. Ready to learn more about poetry's transformational power? Let's break open the vessel and find out what happens. Welcome back to the Poetry Vessel. I'm sitting down again with my wife, Rachel Hassel.
Hey, everybody.
And today we are in my hometown, which is Horsham, England. So if the set looks a little bit different, that is because we are here.
Yeah, Nathan's parents have graciously allowed us to film in their home. So that's where we're sitting today. We're upstairs in their beautiful house in England. It looks straight out of a fairy tale. So we've had an amazing summer and are concluding it in England, which is great. I guess it's almost fall now.
It feels like it's fall. It's been raining and it's a bit cooler in the air, and it's nice to feel the seasons transitioning, and we won't be here for too much of the fall.
Classic English fashion, kicking off the podcast talking about the weather.
So if you're familiar with the Poetry Vessel podcast, you'll know that in our last episode, we revealed our first ever feature, read their poem aloud, and discussed it.
Yes, it was super exciting for us. So we had 2 features in our last episode. If you missed it, we'll link it above. So how this works on the Poetry Vessel podcast typically is we have 1 featured poet and at least 1 mystery box poet. But because we are in England today, things are going to be a little bit different. If you want to submit and have your chance to hear your poem on the Poetry Vessel podcast, click the link below. We'll put all the submission guidelines and details in there. Sadly, Francis did not meet TSA requirements. So Francis the Mystery Box has not come with us to England, which makes us very sad. But we do have a very special surprise at the end. If you're curious about what I'm talking about, what the mystery box is, check out those submission guidelines. It's all in there. And you can learn about Francis B. Malloy, who's very treasured box on the Mystery Vessel, the Poetry Vessel podcast.
I like the Mystery Vessel, but you might want to say that again.
I kind of like it.
Okay. So on this Mystery Vessel, today is going to be extremely mysterious.
I think it feels fitting as well saying the Mystery Vessel because, and I have to sneak this in because this is probably my only opportunity to say this on a Poetry Vessel podcast, but I love the Beatles. And of course, there's the Mystery Tour. Or am I confusing that with Scooby-Doo?
That's the Mystery
The Magical
Machine.
Mystery Tour. The Magical Mystery Tour. So, which feels perfect for England as well. So super excited to be here, to be filming today in England and to be sharing another featured poet. And we have a really great one for you this week. So Nathan, why don't you take it away and introduce them?
Yeah, and I can't wait for this. I've been reading this poem over and over, and I really cannot wait to just discuss it with you, because we haven't actually discussed it at all. We've just read it independently. So today's featured poet is Lisa Marie Basile, who is the author of a few books of poetry, including her most recent, Saint of, which was published by White Stag Publishing in 2025. Lisa also holds an MFA from the New York School in New York City and is the founding editor of Lunar magazine. You can find links to Saint of and her other books in the description box below. So today's poem is called Saint of the Quiet Endless Burn, and it's from Lisa's collection Saint of, which is a really wonderful collection. I've read it, but I haven't spent time with this poem reading it with such depth, which is another reason why I like people submitting poems, even if they're previously published, and even if I've seen them before, it's like, oh, now is the chance to really let them soak in. So without further ado, Saint of the Quiet, Endless Burn. What was it all about, anyway? The spirit circles and the ruins. The hot, wet air of a cathedral filling the space between us. These are poems on paper, put away somewhere as dried flowers. But it isn't about the words, is it? It's a lineation of desire. It's the space between sounds. I think of you unfolding into my life, opening as the skin of the summer, opening to the outside of my purity. Think of the summer. We met in the violence of summer. Two poets at the opposite ends of a table is a ritual, is a riddle. Two poets aching with the tender spectra of the unrealized, but giving it different names. I think you know I was born with a void. I keep my hands to myself, but mostly out of fear. We crossed a river once. We walked in the wood. Do you remember the hum of the bees? How it closed our intolerable distance? And everything was alive and on the precipice. Sometimes I superimpose myself over the hue of your life. What if you're not cream? You're blue and as deep and as dark as it gets. What if the want is the point? What if I am in agony? What if there was never a garden? What if that night split our lives in two, and one of those lives is for me and the other is for you?
Wow. Ooh.
Initial impressions?
Well, just one wow. And I feel so lucky that now on this podcast that we're getting to share such amazing, beautiful poetry. I need to like pick up the poem so I can pick up some specific parts, but so much came up for me both in when we initially read this poem and again hearing it now. I'm sure everyone can tell why I married Nathan. I love listening to you read um, these poems. It comes to life for me in such a beautiful way. I thought it was really interesting about her poetry for one and about this entire collection, even just in the titles, the Saint of, and then for in this case, the Quiet Endless Burn, but I believe there's others like Saint of the Poet. I love that theme to begin with. Also, it feels very fitting the way the poem starts with talking about the hot, wet air of a cathedral filling the space between us. Of course, in England, there's some really beautiful cathedrals. We went to one quite recently in Horsham called St. Mary's.
It's a church.
Oh yeah, I guess it is a church. Well, it feels like cathedral, so it's American. It's so beautiful. We graduated in a cathedral too, an actual cathedral
In Canterbury, yeah.
But there's some really beautiful churches and cathedrals here. So for some reason, that's even becoming more visceral, I think, because of the context that we're in. But I'd love to hear your initial impressions as well, Nathan.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the hot, wet air, because this instantly, the poem starts on a question. It says, what was it all about anyway? It's actually the only moment in the poem that there's a question mark. So questions come back in, but there's periods after them. So it's like the opening to the poem. it makes me think of where Lisa speaks about opening as the skin of the summer later. It's like the hot, wet air. And then I think of like pores are opening and the summer's opening. And there's just something so visceral in this poem, and it's very tactile. And it gets to that tactility straight away. And I really liked even straight after, because there's that line, it's the space between sounds. I mean, there's an argument to be made that poetry is made by its silences, like the words become more resonant as a result of the silence between them. And it's one of the reasons why in poetry you learn a controlled, slower speaking, because you allow the spaces to do some of the, not necessarily some of the work, but it allows the imagination, I think, of the listener to do some of the work. So they're actually connecting things between things while there is silence.
I can tell as well, Nathan brought his A game today. I'm looking over at his piece of paper that is full of notes on this poem. And it shows in what you've already brought out and noticed. So I really love you pointing out that it's opening with a question. I think to go back a little bit more, because there's themes, of course, of love and longing in this poem as well, with the two poets at opposite ends of a table and the ritual of that. I'm like, is there a poet love story as well? If so, I want to hear about it. What did you think about that aspect of the poem?
Well, it makes a special sense reading that aloud here, being at, opposite ends of, table-like structure, which made me feel as if I was really like reading with you and included with you through this. And it was at that moment, where that really like came into being. And as you said, it's like, is a ritual, is a riddle. And this is speaking this more meta commentary on poetry. It's like poetry is a ritual, and there's a riddle, a mystery always inherent within it. Like the best poetry defies full explanation. Even right now, there's a part of poetry that resists this ability to really bring to voice in any other way what it means apart from the words and the structure and the sounds and everything else of the poem itself. So that brought it into the present context for me a lot. And then I like that at the beginning, it's like, what was it all about? It's like, because it starts with this question, and then there's all these what ifs. What if you're not cream, you're blue? What if the want is the point? What if I am in agony? What if there was never a garden? There's all this uncertainty. It's like, this is poetry that sounds like it's coming from memory. And the memory, as you know well, but memory is such a mix of imagination, and sometimes it's your brain's attempt to give information to your present circumstance so that you know how to act. So it's like, here it is, but it might be distorted, or it is distorted because I'm trying to make it relevant to the context of now. Memory is never this complete recalling of what was. It's a reconstruction of different things put together, a bit like a dream, giving it to the moment.
That's such a good point. But there is a nostalgic and memory-like feeling, especially with like think of the summer. We met in the violence of summer. I thought that was a really interesting choice of word as well. The violence of summer. I'm like, is the heat of it? Is it? And like so many things with this poem, my interpretation of it might be very different than obviously what the writer intended or what someone else might take from it, which is why poetry is so wonderful. I think the other thing I wanted to highlight was how the poem ended with, what if that night split our lives in two, and one of those lives is for me and the other is for you. For one, the rhyming there I think is really interesting as well, but also just the idea of when, to me, you know, I'm gonna project a lot on this poem, so be patient with me. Maybe there's a breakup this summer night, or at some point during the poem. It seems like two lovers have been torn apart in one way or another, and they each go on their separate ways in their separate lives. I think that's really interesting. What if that night split our lives into? Like, I think it's really a great way that that's been kind of shown, and that separation of the two paths, where you have that life together, and then all of a sudden it's split into, and leaves you with something really powerful as well for the ending of this poem.
Yeah, and it's riffing off the title, Saint of the Quiet, Endless Burn. There's something in, like, if we stay with the theme of lovers, it's like, it's quiet, maybe it's dampened down, but it's endless. And I think that's a reference to an altar lamp, which
Eternal
is,
flame.
yeah, there are eternal flames, or flames that have been going for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years, that are just eternally burning. And there's something about this flame on the altar, despite a separation. It's like, well, there's still a flicker somewhere. I just realized we never lit our
Oh,
candles.
we
So,
should. Yeah, light the eternal endless
Saint
burn.
of the quiet, endless burn. It's not very endless if it can't even. I guess it's endless if it doesn't even start. Well, there we go.
That was great.
Yeah, so that's part of it. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on is two poets aching with the tender spectre of the unrealized, but giving it different names. One thing is, okay, there's the unrealized. There's always something, a beiging, a dimming, a fogginess that never really finds itself into full consciousness. We encounter this all the time. And maybe a simple way is think there's a word on the tip of my tongue, and maybe it never actually emerges. It's like you have a image of what it's meant to be, but you can't get to it. And when I think of the giving something different names, it's like when you encounter an experience, me and you will have this podcast, and if we go and talk to someone, they say, "What was it like?" We'll both say very different things to different people, like when we're talking differently. So it's like, well, there's something about how we describe that is giving names to things differently. And there's something in naming. Naming creates a label which allows us sometimes to understand something better. When you give something I think it's a Shakespearean line, like a local habitation and a name, it becomes real in a new sense, but it also changes it.
Mm.
So you say, what's that? You go, oh, it's a spruce tree. Well, it's not a spruce tree. We just call it a spruce tree. Like, is it even a tree? You know, we can get into, but we've named it that so we can categorize it, so we can understand it, so we can put it in its place. But it's way more endless than that.
That's really interesting. Very philosophical as well, Nathan, which is very on brand.
Just going on
Is a
tangents.
tree a tree? And I don't mean to tease you. I think that's a really good point, about
You should
how
tease
we.
me.
I do quite often.
Yeah, I deserve it.
I think mainly it's like this is like off camera. I'm like, you're doing really well, and I don't even know what to say because that's a really good point.
Just riff anywhere.
So I lean on teasing you
Yeah,
instead.
that's fine. I do that too when I'm not sure.
I'm like, that sounded really smart, so let me tease you. Um,
You're an older sibling at home, so,
yeah,
and I've got an older brother, so I know the game.
yeah. No, but it's a really good point, and like how we come to understand things. And you mentioned Shakespeare earlier, but it's kind of like a rose by any other name would still smell as sweet. I believe referring to Juliet and Romeo and Juliet. But it's like no matter what you call the rose, it's still going to smell as sweet.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the point. It's like the sensory engagement is still there.
Mm-hmm.
You just categorized it. And nice bringing up of Shakespeare quotes. I'm almost at my limit. I've got one, and this is from a song because it's one of those things. It's like, oh, I can quote Shakespeare, and I actually not particularly good at that. I remember that other line, and I have four lines in my head that I remember, and it's from a track from an artist called Saltillo,
Mm-hmm.
and he quotes it within the song. And it's two loves I have, a one of comfort and despair. It's like two spirits that suggest me still. The better angel is a man right fair, the worse spirit, a woman coloured ill. That feels like it relates here somewhere, and maybe why all these conversations are emerging. I want to pivot our conversation because, especially speaking about like the spectra, the ghostly, the endless flame, we recently have been recording a video for Lorca, Federico Garcia Lorca, the Spanish poet, and Duende. And we went to a graveyard at a church in my hometown, and we did some recording. And one of the things we recorded was a poem of my own that I know off memory. But after we did all that and we came back home, a few weird things happened. Rachel, would you like to explain your experience?
Uh, do I want to embarrass myself on the internet? Sure, let's go.
What else would you be on the internet for?
What else is the internet for?
I mean,
But to embarrass yourself.
if you're going to tease me, I'm going to tease
I know,
you.
this is going to live there forever. I'm going to look like a crazy person, but okay. All right, how do I put this? So, as Nathan said, we went to a church, not a cathedral, in Horsham called St. Mary's, which I referred to earlier. Beautiful church, really old, just fantastic, and also has a very old graveyard with, gravestones or headstones in it, I should say, that are from, the 1800s. And while Nathan was reading his poem in that graveyard, I got the whole chills sort of feeling. It felt very spooky. I'm also a big scaredy cat in general, like a bit scared of the dark. I don't normally believe in ghosts, but this feels fitting for an episode that's probably coming out in October about some ghost stories.
Ooh.
So, um, it's going to sound so silly, but felt really spooked at the time when Nathan was reading this poem. And after that, didn't think much of it. Came back that night, and this hadn't happened before, and it also hasn't happened since, which is very strange to me. But I was essentially in the shower, doing what you do in the shower, washing my hair, all that good stuff. And all of a sudden, the lights started to flicker on and off and then stay off for a very long time. Long enough that it felt like the power had gone out. That's what I thought had happened at first. And being from Malibu, of course, we have power outages all the time.
Can I jump in very quickly?
Mhm.
There also is a bathroom that doesn't have a window, so if the light goes out, it's
Very, very
completely dark, pitch black.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Hence also my being a little bit afraid of the dark to begin with. So the lights were flickering and then they would just stay off. And I was like, okay, the power's gone out. Need to figure out, because the way this bathroom is set up, you're in like a bathtub, but then there's a big step down. And it's very easy to slip in there even when the lights are on. So I was worried about that. But then the lights would flicker back on, and this kind of kept repeating. And again, I'm going to sound like a crazy person on the internet, and I don't normally believe in these types of things. So before I'm labeled as some crazy superstitious lady,
Get rid of who cares about that? Just get into the good stuff.
I just felt like it just felt weird. It didn't feel right, and I think it was mainly because the lights had got off, and of course there could have been some sort of electrical issue. Maybe the bulb was going bad, but the same bulb is in there now. And it has not happened since. And this was only on the evening after we'd gone to the graveyard and read that poem. So I came downstairs like a little scaredy cat. And I was like, Nathan, this really weird experience happened. I know I sound crazy, but I feel like we brought somebody home with us from the graveyard. And we're standing in front of headstones that were very, very old. And I feel like if any group of people in time is going to haunt you, it's going to be people from the 1800s or
time
earlier.
Of Jack the Ripper.
Yeah. So essentially got out the sage. I was like, I need to be cleansed. So yeah, there's me embarrassing myself on the internet, but I'm pretty sure we brought home a ghost that really likes poetry to Nathan's mom and dad's house. Sorry, Sharon and Paul. We saged it. It's fine now, I'm sure.
Well, there's a few things that, when you came and told me about it, so, if you feel afraid of sounding crazy on the internet, I think I took it to the next level.
Yeah, I know what you're going to say, and you're going to get even worse than me.
So, when you came and told me about it, I was like, okay, when people tell me stuff like this, I like to take it seriously, whether it's psychological, real. I mean, I know the lights went off, but I don't really always care. I'm like, okay, something needs to be honored here, whether it's actually a
If it's
haunting or
in
whether
my
it's not.
head or it's a
Yeah,
ghost.
exactly. Like a ritual act needs to take place. We're talking about ritual. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go up to the bathroom. I'm going to investigate. I'm going to do all this stuff because I'm going to be also manly hero walking into a bathroom. And when I got there, this could have happened because Rachel told me about what was going on already. So I was already primed for it, or something else. But I went up to the bathroom and I got flushed with the same goosebumps. I was like, yeah, something does feel. I'm going to get
Weird.
Californian here, but energetically off. The
The vibes
vibes, the vibes were
vibes were
they were
off.
they were either really vibing or they were
They were
unvibing.
vibing too much.
And being a strange fellow myself, I was like, okay, there might be something here. So I kind of had my hands like this. And I was like, okay, what is it to potentially this spirit? And I felt in my body and heard in my head. It wasn't like an external thing, but like it's all horror and death and war and terror. And I was like, wow, that's, a lot. And I kind of gave this karma like, okay, I'm sorry you sound like you're in pain, but can you please leave our house? This is a bit much. We don't need you here. Like, I understand, like, you need to go to rest. So I did a few different things. Like, I opened different windows in other areas of the house. I opened the front door. I kept going back to Rachel and I was reporting back. And I'm like, I still feel it like here on the stairs, but it's not in the bathroom anymore. And, to me, it was male. He was male.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it just felt like it had gone. But I did contact a lady I know in Ireland who deals with ghosts and spirits, and I really respect her. And she gave me some advice that I haven't yet done because we haven't gone back there yet, but I will, to bring an offering to that one grave that you were present at while you were reading the poem, and bring an offering, just a stone, and then strike a match and let it burn down. And then once you've done that, say you can go in peace, because it might just be a wandering lost soul. And it didn't feel malevolent. It just felt scared. And I guess if that's projection,
It was
I
a
felt a little bit
bit
scared.
rude joining me in the shower.
Yes, that's not nice. You weren't invited into that. So it was really strange. But we picked to read this poem before that experience. So it's interesting that this also came in. And I'm thinking again of that hot, wet air, and the air being wet around the grave, and we were covered by all these different trees, and light was getting through, but if there was just a presence in what we were doing, and it always reminds me, like, don't mess around. I didn't think we were messing around, and I was respectful of the person at the grave. We read the name. There was a poem on the gravestone. I've sat at that one before and like written, and I have this strange like relation to the headstone and who's buried there as a result of that. So yeah, it's I didn't realize we were going to get into a ghost story today, but go on, you respond, and then I've got another.
Yeah, I didn't either. And I don't know if this episode will come out in September or October, but either way, if you have a ghost story as well, help me feel a little less alone, a little less crazy on the internet. And please put them in the comments. I would love to hear your best ghost stories.
I will say this. I actually want to leap off that a little bit. Lots of people have either ghost stories or even sometimes like spiritual experiences or transcendent ones, or things where the regular rules of day-to-day consciousness feel upended. But a lot of people don't want to admit them because people are afraid. I mean, Rachel kind of even said it, even though she let you know. But I'm afraid of sounding crazy. And this happens a lot. Our culture actually smushes stories down because we're like, well, there's no scientific evidence behind that. So one of the ways I like to look at things is like, yes, but you can honor the psychological and even the spiritual dimension of something, even if you don't necessarily think it objectively happened. It may have objectively happened, but it definitely subjectively happened. And it became a shared experience. You could say a folie à deux, shared psychosis. We were both entertaining the same delusion, or there was something more serious to contend with. So,
We will never know, which is the thing. It's, yeah, either way, it felt spooky. If nothing else, than the practical element of I don't want to slip in this really dark bathroom.
Yeah, yeah. And that
Um,
was the tender spectre of the unrealized.
yeah.
It's still unrealized and will remain unrealized despite what names we will give it.
And again, strange. We haven't changed the light bulb. We haven't changed anything. And it has not happened since.
It didn't happen even when I went up there
Yeah.
to turn it on.
It was weird.
Just you, my dear.
It was weird.
I have a transition point if you're okay with it.
Mm.
Because you're talking about Goosebumps. And we have an article.
Excellent transition, Nathan.
See, this is all this filming and podcasting. So I have an article. It's called How Poetry Changes You and Your Brain. And it goes into details about neuroscience and psychology of poetry through studies. And it's written by Mabel Buchanan Palmer. It was published on April the 8th, 2025. It was published in Greater Good magazine out of Berkeley. And there's a moment in this that I want to discuss. And I've read this study before. It's a 2017 study out of the Max Planck Institute for Empirical Aesthetics. Not a mouthful. And they discuss a goose cam, which is essentially a camera that can take quality images of goosebumps on the skin. And they were recording goosebumps in response to poems. And there's something that is unique to poetry. There's a brain area that's involved in pleasure called the nucleus accumbens, which behaves uniquely in response to poetry. So I don't think it responds in the same way even with music. And that there is the most aesthetic pleasure when there are physiological markers of negative emotion. So when you're moved by something that's maybe sad, you actually have a maximum response of pleasure. To be purely speculative, why do you think that might be?
People often say that, and I think we can maybe all relate to this in one way or another in our lives, that will often either attach more meaning or are more likely to remember negative, even comments. You might get 1,000 positive comments, and then one negative comment. And we're more likely to, I think, remember or attach ourselves to that. So I think there is something in attaching ourselves to the negative, and I'm sure there's lots of psychological reasons for that. The way they put it, the complex mix of pleasure and suffering is when humans are most moved. I mean, how many instances from your life can you remember? Either maybe it's a really sad story or it's bittersweet, and those can really, really touch you. So I think off the top of my head, maybe because it is complex, it's not purely a positive thing or just negative. That mixture is what's moving or memorable with poetry. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts. I mean, the one on one of the prevailing theories on feeling negative more than positive is if you're walking through the woods and you hear a noise in the bush, you want your first reaction to be like, holy crap, that might be a tiger, rather than like, it's probably nothing. Because then survival tells you seek the negative data because you might be under threat, which gets weaponized all the time, through rhetoric and everything else. And then my thought with it's interesting that it's specifically in response to poetry, and I'll talk about something to do with Shelley shortly that's related to this. But one, it's like creating a safe ritual context to explore the complex. It's like you're creating a piece of art that can move you, but there's something at least physiologically safe in the sense that you're not walking through the dark and under direct threat. When you watch a horror film, even though you have a suspension of belief, you understand that you're watching a film, but you can be like really in it and you can feel terrified, or the horror or the tension of being in it. There's somewhere in you that knows that you're also like not actually under the threat that you're experiencing through the film.
A safe way to explore that.
Exactly. So I wonder if pleasure comes from that, and you wouldn't necessarily get that, at least not necessarily initially, if you're somewhere and you feel like there's a tiger in the bushes. I wonder, and they get to this later. They say that chills were most likely to occur at the ends of lines, stanzas, or poems. At the end. And is it, if you're really in something, again with the horror film, if you're inside the experience, maybe it does feel like it is happening to some degree. It's happening imaginatively. But when you get to the end of something or there's a pause, you kind of recognize or reposition yourself as like, oh yeah, I'm here. And you kind of realize, and then you kind of get the, I don't know, the tension. Again, this is purely speculative. I'm not claiming to speak from authority on this. I'm just trying to pass through this because it's such an interesting thing. It's like, why, and apparently this is unique to poetry. Like, why is the negative emotion so affecting and so maximally pleasurable in poetry?
I think this is what's so interesting about how poetry can affect the body and the brain. This is something that on this channel we've actually been talking about for a long time. You can go back and watch some embarrassing early videos of poetry and the brain, and it tends to be one of the most searched things on our website as well that leads people to the Poetry Vessel is the impact of poetry in the brain. I think through reading this article, which we'll link down below as well, one of the new terms I suppose that I came across in this was about bibliotherapy and how therapy or how poetry can be used in a positive way for well-being. So in this article, it details a 2016 article from Christina Wu of the University College of London, in which our brains derive pleasure from 4 different categories. So those 4 categories are making connections, especially across distance, problem solving, especially when a problem resists solving, predicting and confirming or challenging our predictions, learning, especially when learning involves reconciliation. So I think there's a few things in here. I think number 3 for predicting and confirming or challenging our predictions is interesting when we think about poetry as surprise, which we like to talk about as well. And with making connections, especially across distance. From that, I took away and I believe the article talks about it as well, but metaphors and themes and how you can take 2 disparate things and connect them together and how that can give our brain some pleasure as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely the connections across distance. And there's something Robert Bly calls like leaping. You can leap associatively between concepts, and you can follow it like in a dream, leaps associatively to a different concept. And you can follow it logically, but it's like when it's across distance, you might not have necessarily put those things together before. And I think in these 4 categories from Christina Wu, I see them playing out in Lisa's poem, and I mean, she's literally referring to distance in the poem. So I'm like, these connections are being made between the poets at the opposite ends of the table. The problem solving is that mystery. Like we like a whodunit.
Mm.
And there's something about that within the poem and poetry itself. I don't mean in a detective novel sort of way, but like there's just all these unanswered questions, and we're the reader, for your imaginative engagement to really be brought in, it's like you are being asked to help solve a problem that a poem presents you. I mean, this poem, what was it all about anyway? It starts with a question. It's like, well, let's solve the problem. What was it all about?
And don't you think as well, sometimes with poetry, what is so interesting and special about it is you don't get all of the answers.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of people will come up to me even after hearing one of your poems and say, "What do you think that meant? That meant what Nathan wrote about such and such here. What does this mean? What was his intention when he wrote something like that?" And I often tell those people that you would tell me, "Well, what did it make you think of? What did you think? What did you take from this?" So you don't always get the answers from the poet as well, who wrote it, from the writer of the poem. But maybe you find your own answers in it, and maybe you find something that it means to you, and maybe that's significant to you as well.
Yeah. And the way I like to see that is you're not always privy to the context in which the poem came about. And everything I can say about a poem I wrote isn't the poem itself. It can help. That a bit of context isn't necessarily a bad thing. I think, like, even in readings, you can contextualize a poem, but if you're there explaining it, every last detail, every last choice, every part of it, it's like, well, I think you've, rather than breaking it apart to reveal something that it is, I think you actually start concealing what the poem really is, because everyone's running off with the explanations. It's like, well, encounter the piece of art as it reveals itself to you. So yes, I'm glad you say that, because when people go, oh, what exactly did you mean? My pedantic response is, I mean what the poem said. And I read somewhere very recently, and I wish I remember who said it, but it's like, the poem should convey a knowledge that is beyond the poet's understanding who had written it. So no one can fully know it. Like this poem right now that we've got, there's so much mystery in it. The poet, I suspect, if this idea is true, Lisa couldn't explain exactly what this means. The poem is explaining or exploring the meaning, and we are exploring that meaning by co-creating it with our imaginative engagement. Of course, she had a context in which she wrote this, but that doesn't necessarily explain it.
And we can't speak for any poets, of course, and each poet might approach this differently, but I find it interesting sometimes when you don't get all of the answers with every little bit of the poem. But I guess speaking of readings, because there's been a few different readings in Horsham, you even had a reading yesterday. I'm not sure if anyone can tell that we're a little bit raspy today. We were at a friend's wedding last night, and Nathan read a poem for their wedding as well, which was really lovely, for one of his best friends from school growing up, that you've known.
Since I was 14.
Yeah, since you were 14
Yeah,
years old.
21 years.
So we were dancing the night away last night. And then there's been other special readings that we've been a part of since being in England. I'm not sure if you wanted to touch on any of those in Horsham.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the wedding, as of recording, it happened yesterday. As you said, raspy voices. I feel like I sound like I have a cold. It's just because I was shouting over music for a lot of the evening. But in the beautiful ceremony, and I was invited just after the rings were gifted between the now husband and wife to read a poem, which I was sitting the day before with you, or going through. Rachel adeptly assisting in editing, reading it aloud, finding bits that sounded best and everything else. It's been really important for me to feel a rerouting being back in England, and I feel my poetic sense and sensibility is weaker here. One of the reasons is going to the US for so long and learning so much from the US, but it's not fully integrated here. And through a mix of, I read it out of a poem, so a little story, and I'm not going to use his name. I don't want to embarrass him, and I don't hold this against him. But two of my friends who were both at the wedding, who, when I first started writing poetry when I was 17, and I told them about it, they laughed in my face. Ah, that's so stupid. All this typical teenage boy stuff. So there was a fun full circle moment where my friend said, would you like to read a poem at my wedding? And I, obviously jokingly, but I was like, come crawling back after all these years, but there was something nice and full circle around it. Like, not it's not something I hold against him. He was 17. I would have done the same thing if it was the other way around. I just happened to be the one that went down that route. But being able to take part in a ceremony and feel like this is one of the roles that the bard plays. I know other poets, they're like, I'm always asked to be the person who reads the poem at the wedding. You're like, yeah, fortunately, I should say, you have chosen to be part of roles like that. Like, people are going to ask you. They want art, they want music, they often want poetry present at one of the most important times in their life.
So true. And I think when people think about, like, do I like poetry? Maybe for the person that doesn't listen to poetry very often. And yet, often those same people are the ones that it feels fitting or something that they're craving it in those, funerals, weddings, different things in those occasions that mean so much to us. It also shows how much people can grow over time. Like when you're young and you might be like, ugh, art, or your like emotions cringe. But
Yeah.
but
Emotions are cringe.
but I find it really cool that your friend asked you, and you also read a poem at your sister's wedding too. So it's what an honor that you get to do that.
And that, I mean, I got to read a poem in England at a wedding, and I got to read a poem in Greece at a wedding. And for those of you who don't know, I'm American, English, and Greek. So I just need I just need to read a poem at a wedding in America, and I feel like it's all.
You had her vows, maybe they were poetic.
Yeah, there's some poetic vows, but yours were poetic vows too. I just wanted to say quickly, even on that, and referring back to Saint of the Quiet Endless Burn, there's a moment where the spirit circles and the ruins. And I read circles as verb and noun. You could have the spirit circles, which could be, a place. It could be the circles, like the spirit square.
Uh-huh.
And then it's also the spirit circles, like there is a spirit that's circling, and the ruins. But when I think of the spirit circles, and I'm thinking about a wedding, I'm thinking about a wedding ring, you've got the endless circle that you wear on your finger. I'm thinking the spirit circles within the context of the ritual of the wedding. Therefore, people are enjoying a poem because it's very much in a context that is honouring a place for art to really emerge. And context is really key to when you want to hear a poem. I mean, there's a big difference between trying to read, I think Sean Coletti speaks about this, trying to read a poem when you're on a crowded train on a London underground is a very different experience to being silent and hearing it aloud at a wedding. These contexts are different, and one is probably more favourable than the other. I'll let you decide what you think it is and let me know what you think it is, but to you. But I know what I prefer.
Speaking of great or interesting settings for poems, we are heading to a poetry reading tonight, which this article that we were just talking about also encourages people to do and get out there and listen to poetry, find a poetry podcast like, the Poetry Vessel podcast to get more poetry into your life. But we're going to be listening to poetry on a houseboat in England tonight, which will be really fun. And I believe it's an open mic, so Nathan might read a poem or two there.
It's in Shoreham, houseboat in Shoreham.
Yes.
By the sea.
So Nathan mentioned earlier, I think that you feel, I'm not sure what word you use, but like your relationship to poetry in England is very different from your relationship to poetry in the US because, we've been living over in the US together for the last 7 or so years. And it's been really nice coming to England and getting more familiar with the local poetry scenes here. So Nathan actually grew up on a street in England that had a name of a famous poet on it, and the whole neighborhood has names of famous poets. So I won't say the name of that poet in particular just for safety reasons, but find it really cool and poetic itself that you grew up surrounded by poets all over the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was sprinkled on me like magic, and I didn't appreciate it when I was younger, growing up around all these great names of poetry, all these famous romantic poets mainly.
Mm-hmm.
And we walked around there while we were here more recently, and were reading some poems or lines or ideas from each of them. Ironically, even though Shelley is from this town, he was not one of the poets on the street names, but the whole of this town has some spirit of Shelley in it because he was from Warnham, which is a neighbouring village, and lived in Horsham, I believe.
And fun fact, Nathan worked in a pub in that village,
Yes.
Warnham. So there's multiple ties here for Nathan specifically.
And one thing that's really exciting that is happening in Horsham is there's a Shelley Memorial Project. So I met with a Shelley Memorial Project. I've been in contact with them for a while. I actually submitted a poem to one of their contests. I forget the name of the winner, but the winning poem is unbelievable. We should link it below. It's really great. And I've been in contact with them back and forth. And they can let me in on what they're doing with the Shelley Memorial Project. So in Horsham, they want to build a memorial to the poet Shelley to honour his life, his achievements in poetry, and celebrate art and poetry in this town. And there are monuments or placards, there's different things about Shelley in London, in Italy, and there's nothing really in Horsham. There used to be Shelley Fountain, very controversial in the sense that people weren't really sure why it was this fountain. I'm sure we can put a picture up of it. However, they want to put a full memorial that celebrates him. And one of the things is to bring the poetic, the poetic sensibility, the inspiration to the youth into Horsham, which I think is really exciting.
Yeah, and we might be creating another video that takes you around Horsham with us and shows you some of these street names that we're mentioning. There's also different nods to Shelley or nods to other poets throughout Horsham, which is fun. If you're ever in England and you want to do a little poetry tour, you should check that out. But I feel like it's only fitting to perhaps hear a poem from the Shelley. The Shelley.
From the
Mr.
Shelley
From the
himself.
Shelley himself.
Yeah.
And also, if you're ever in England, just, you know, another thing that is cool that Nathan and I plan on doing. There's a bike trail, I believe, that goes between Horsham and Warrenham, which is the Shelley bike trail.
Mhm.
So another fun way to integrate poetry and some exercise into your life.
Quick bit of context on Shelley. He's a romantic poet. He's very famous. I'm not going to give a full biopic. There's plenty written about him that's easily discoverable, but there's a really famous sentence that he wrote in A Defense of Poetry, which I believe was an unfinished essay about poetry. And it was in response to a friend. And the famous last sentence says, "Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world," which is, I mean, it's idealistic, but the truth in that I was thinking of is we have historians. Historians tend to write about the material conditions of the past and how they affect the present and perhaps where the future might go. We have philosophers which are dealing with the history of thought, of intellect, and also of more spiritual ideas, depending on the philosophy that you go to. Now I think of the poets, and Shelley takes this from the Neoplatonic tradition, that you are going into the world of forms, the other world where there is a truth. And the poet, which can be any maker, so it could be an architect, it could be a musician, goes into that world and pulls something out of truth and sets it down. And the unacknowledged legislators is, well, because his essay was in response to a friend that was saying poetry is just kind of fanciful and it's useless, you should be, into science. Shelley is writing about literature as a purveyor of imaginative truth, essentially. So with that in mind, I think reading a poem from him can demonstrate this idea that imaginative engagement is where something of high value and soul worth is.
Wow.
You did words.
Yes.
Yes. So this is Ozymandias by Percy Shelley. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, king of kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Do you know that Shelley died when he was 29? So everything he wrote
Wow.
was before he was 29. His intellect was colossal, and you can only imagine what he might have continued to achieve had he lived longer. I think that seems to be a theme in the Romantics. Keats died, I think, younger than Shelley as well.
Really,
Yeah.
really. How did Shelley die?
Well, there's a bit of controversy about it. He died on a boat in Italy, and I think I read this in The Powers of Poetry a really long time ago. So was he pushed? Was he killed and put in there? Did he fall off? There's a bit of mystery around that, and something that I need to read more about. So I don't want to state any of this with any sort of authority. So we'll double check before we publish this. So although short-lived, his legacy continues on. And I think about like now, I think of like what a young poet is. And you think about a poet in their 20s writing something that powerful seems unlikely. I feel like we maybe we grow older slower. There's just very few people that achieve this level of intellect, that even if you're in your 20s, you are able to find some form of brilliance. Poets like T.S. Eliot would disagree with me. I don't think he was a big fan of the Romantics because they were too fanciful, So
Would you consider yourself a romantic poet?
I think there's a neo-romanticism in some of my work, and I mean that in the case of the old romantics, about nature, about there being maybe something you're exploring, like the truth and even maybe like God or something spiritual within nature. I'd say that I bring that into my poetry, and I'm romantic in a romancing sense. I'm sure you might agree with some of the pieces that I write have that romantic. I just read at a wedding, but that's different than the capital R romantics.
Yes. I mean, you're very romantic, full stop. I still remember at my bridal shower when, we were doing one of those games where it's like, raise your hand if Nathan's more like this or Rachel's more like this. And one of the questions was like, who's more romantic? And it was like Nathan by a landslide. I was like, okay, true. I think I'm the only one that voted for myself.
I didn't know. That's funny.
But again, that is different than the proper romantic poet. But I'm really glad that you shared that poem from Shelley. And even though it's an older poem, how work like that has stood the test of time. I mean, even just having a whole group that's dedicated themselves to Shelley and his work and for seeking to create this memorial in Horsham. They're such a lovely group of people, and we're so welcoming to Nathan and I at Poetry and Pints and the other events. So hope to see them again soon. It was super fun to meet a new group of poets. And that's part of what we love about things like the Poetry Vessel podcast is it can connect poets from all over the world, and we can build our own community here as well, which is great. So I hope everyone gets to know each other in the comments too.
We'll put details to the Shelley Memorial Project in the description box, and they're also looking for donations. If you read about them and it's something that you're interested in, feel free to explore that.
Great.
So even though we didn't have the mystery box today, there was still something of mystery. There was a huge amount of mystery for
Few
me
mysteries.
in this, and so many of the unanswered. And I feel, referring back to Lisa's poem, "We crossed a river once." I feel like we are constantly crossing new rivers when we're having these conversations. I've said it in a previous one. I want to hear something from you, and I want to say something to you that is something we've never said before. And I definitely feel like that has happened. And, you know, in Lisa's poem, everything was alive and on the precipice. I would say everything is alive and on the preface. Everything, preface, that's funny. Everything is alive and on the preface was my Freudian slip rather than precipice. Everything is alive, and it's right at the beginning. Rachel, would you like to say anything else?
As always, thank you so much for listening and watching. If you'd like to join our community of poets, you can click the link down below to join our mailing list, or if you'd like to submit your poem for a chance to either be featured in the mystery box or as a featured poet on the Poetry Vessel podcast, visit the link to submit your poem. Lately, we've had such an influx of submissions to the Poetry Vessel podcast. It's been so exciting and amazing to see. People from all over the world are submitting their poems, so we can't wait to read yours next. We read every single one. And thank you so much to Lisa Marie Basile again for submitting your poem to the Poetry Vessel podcast. And thank you so much for being with us here on the Poetry Vessel podcast.
Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.